Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that brief music break. And of course, with Julio Jones leaving Atlanta, we've got to talk about the Atlanta story. Of course, Julio Jones is a Titan. We all know that. But we've got to talk about it from the Falcons side. And I thought of no better person to bring on than the 3 points conversions, Danny Thompson. What's going on, man?
I mean, Mike, it's always it's the first time I've had a chance to jump on with you in a while, man. Last time you didn't have the dreads, and last time we had jumped on together.
Well, I don't necessarily have dreads; they're like twists. But those that are watching live, yes, I have done something different to my hair than the last time. But yeah. But for those who are listening, you probably are like, "What is he talking about?" But that's all right. Go to the YouTube version; you'll see it there. But anyway, but yeah, man, I changed up a few things. But as far as changing up things, definitely Atlanta has changed up a few things, and it was probably a long time in the making. Ever since that impromptu conversation between Shannon Sharp and Julio Jones on FS1 that day.
Mm-hmm. It had happened way before this. I think it was, from what every reports have always been said, that Julio Jones had requested a trade a few months ago, and it was done in private because everybody, and especially from Atlanta fans, know Julio Jones is an extremely private person. So with Julio being an extremely private person, one of the things that people didn't know about the trade request, and it just so happens on national television, Shannon Sharp aired out Julio's trade request to everybody. So it was well known. I think it was a point where the Falcons knew they only had two options. And I think Julio, at 32 years old, he feels as though that the Falcons are not a championship contender at this point. And there are various reasons why. I think it hurt Arthur Blank more than anybody else that it got public. I think if anybody, Arthur Blank was hurt by it. But as fans of the Falcons, they kind of knew this divorce was coming because he was the one not to restructure his contract. So it was bound to happen eventually.
Gotcha. So, all right. So it's finally happened. Where do the Falcons go now after this has happened?
Well, the Falcons have always had a transition from one receiver to the next when it comes as far as the franchise goes. You can go back to the days where you even think of Andre Rison back in the 90s. We went from Andre Rison to Terrence Mathis to Roddy White to Julio Jones. Now Julio Jones now in the hands of Calvin Ridley. We've transitioned. That's been kind of a different transition. Julio's now in the jersey, but the Falcons have always had a transitional receiver from one great Falcon to the next, and it's not as bad as people think because Atlanta's actually in good shape. Arthur Smith is now coming over from Tennessee, and I think it's going to simplify the offense for Matt Ryan. They brought in Mike Davis, and like I said, with Julio, with Calvin Ridley on the outside, and then them drafting, Kyle Pitts in the first round, that gives Atlanta much more, I would say, options, and Pitts can play a little bit of the wideout position. He's big enough to do it, so it's not as bad as people think. And we have some cap space, and most importantly, the Titans ate all the salary, and that would think as Falcons fans, that's the most important. Atlanta's not fronting the bill for any of this except for that dead cap hit next year.
That is a big thing. Definitely the money. I mean, and honestly, trading him is going to help them sign their rookie class anyway. So I saw a little bit of information on that. One thing I want to ask is, do you feel relieved that it's finally over?
It's a two-pronged perspective. I mean, at some point, you have to move on. I'm kind of glad this is over. It's been hanging over our heads, ever since the trade request was, it was made public, and the Falcons couldn't trade him until June 1st. There was talks the Falcons had a first-round pick from a team in the NFC, but you would rather Julio Jones catch passes in another conference than Julio Jones catching passes in your conference. So whoever had that first-round pick, I'm assuming it had to be someone that the Falcons either were playing or the Falcons had a chance to see in the playoffs. So, I'm relieved that it's over. Now we can get to minicamp because we didn't know if Julio was going to show up for mandatory minicamp in another week or so. We didn't know if he was coming. So with that being said, I'm glad it's over. I hate to see him go. He's arguably one of my favorite 5 Falcons of all time. But he was well worth everything that we gave up to get him. A couple years ago, that trade. So he's had a great career in Atlanta. I mean, a Hall of Fame career in Atlanta, and it's time to take the next step forward. And we got Calvin Ridley.
All right, now, question I do have is, do you feel that the Titans gave them enough for Julio?
I think the major balking point was who was going to take the salary. I think it wasn't even, I mean, compensation is one thing. And I know Falcon fans are going to say, well, we got a 2 from Mohamed Sanu in the middle of the season from the Patriots. This is a little different story. Mohamed Sanu wasn't going to kill the Falcons cap. It wasn't holding the Falcons cap back. And Mohamed Sanu is not Julio Jones. So when people think, oh, the Falcons got a 2nd and a 5th for Julio Jones, it is really they got the best offer they could without getting hit in the head. But most importantly is that the Falcons have financial flexibility, like he's mentioned before. The Falcons can sign rookies. The Falcons might be able to go find somebody else in free agency if they have a little bit of money left, especially to help out the defensive side of the ball. Every Falcon fan knows the defense has been the problem for years. Matt Ryan has his flaws, but it's been a defensive problem for years. Now the Falcons can sign everything they've drafted, and we can just go forward. So I'm glad and relieved that it's over. I'm just, it's a little optimism, but Arthur Smith is now in charge. And if he turned the Titans into something, I would love to see he does with Matt Ryan.
All right. So we've definitely visited from the Falcons perspective. Going to flip it just a little bit here and ask, from the Titans perspective, what can they expect? What can Titans fans expect from Julio Jones?
Julio Jones and A.J. Brown automatically become the best receiving duo in franchise history. Arguably, they might be the best duo going back to the Houston Oilers days when they had to run and shoot with Ernest Givens and Haywood Jeffries. That's how good they are. If A.J. Brown was catching double teams last year, he's going to get single coverage going down the field. And one of the things that Titan fans will see is the fact of, you thought A.J. Brown developed last year, put him next to an all-pro wide receiver that's going to be a Hall of Famer, and watch the work ethic just rub off on A.J. Brown. We're not going to say he doesn't have a great work ethic, but it's now going to be even enhanced with a guy who has been an all-pro, a guy that is a perennial Pro Bowler. Is going to be more likely a future Hall of Famer, maybe even first ballot Hall of Famer with his accolades and things he's done in Atlanta. What Titans fans should expect is, people talk about the injury history of Julio Jones. It really wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. Yeah, he's had hamstring issues, but Jones hasn't missed more than this. I think this year's the most games Julio's missed in the season. And another thing is, Julio is a threat in the red zone. Don't let the Falcon touchdown numbers fool you. It was a bunch of things, but Julio Jones can get in the end zone. And double team coverage or not, Ryan Tannehill has no excuses, because he has 2 deep threats down the field now. And you got to think, a motivated Julio Jones to prove that he's still the best wide receiver in the game. Titans fans might as well go ahead and buy that jersey right now, because Falcon fans have enjoyed him for the last 9 years. And the thing is, Julio is not the back of his career. You got at least 2 or 3 good years out of Julio left.
Gotcha. Now, as far as the Titans and how far they can go, now I asked Teron Davenport this question, and he definitely said, for those that weren't listening earlier, but ESPN's Teron Davenport, he said, potentially, you definitely can think Super Bowl with this team. What are your thoughts on Julio and the other additions to this team this offseason, and where that can put the Tennessee Titans? Well,
the good news is that anytime you have Derrick Henry, as long as Derrick Henry's on the field and controlling the clock, that is automatically going to be, a drawing point. Teams aren't going to focus on A.J. Brown double teaming. That's going to leave, receivers being open in open areas. But Tennessee's main question is defense. Julio Jones isn't going to stop anybody. The Titans really still have to figure out how to shore up those holes on defense, but they now have another weapon that can help in a scoring battle, because you might have to deal with Kansas City in the playoffs. So at least you have another weapon on offense. And anytime you have weapons on offense against Kansas City, who's not the best pass defense in the league, it will help. Because if you can jump on Kansas City early, imagine tackling Derrick Henry in the second half. teams don't want to do that. So I think it's going to affect it. As far as Super Bowl, I still think they're still behind Kansas City as far as the Super Bowl race. I think they moved ahead of Buffalo now. I think they're right at that number 2 spot in the AFC at this point.
Interesting take. Interesting take. Again, Julio's leaving Atlanta, but he's spent majority of his career there. Where do you put him all time as your favorites in terms of in terms of Falcons?
He's the greatest receiver in Falcons history. I don't think that is. I mean, he's already surpassed Roddy White's the greatest Falcon of all time. As far as my favorite Falcons, I mean, he's literally. I think he's probably he's in the top 3 of my favorite Falcons of all time, and he's definitely one of the 5 greatest Falcons of all time. I think he's cracked that list, and he's well deserved of it. I mean, for my list in no order, it's Julio Jones, it is Matt Ryan, it's still Tommy Nobles, it's still Jesse Tuggle, and then that 5th one. I can't put. I mean, as much as great as Deion was, but Deion did so many damage in some other places, so I really can't put him there. You probably have to go Clark Humphreys because he is a Hall of Famer. You can't go against a guy that's in the Hall of Fame as a Falcon. So to me, those are the 5 greatest Falcons of all time. And there might be, there are arguments, but Jones is definitely one of the 5 greatest Falcons because it's just that I guess the duo of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones will always have that stigmatism of never winning the big one. If they won the big one, you would say they're probably the best, one of the best quarterback receiver duos of all time.
Gotcha. Now, of course, Julio's gone, but you do have Matt Ryan still there. What would you say is a timetable on him either leaving or does he stay the rest of his career in Atlanta?
Well, I think it comes to the point where the Falcons would have to make a decision whether they can keep him. The one thing Matt Ryan has always done is that Matt Ryan, when it comes down to giving up money, Matt Ryan has always restructured his contract to help the Falcons out. He did it again this year. I think he saved the Falcons about $15-16 million with restructuring. As long as Matt Ryan's willing to restructure towards as he gets older, he'll still be a Falcon. The numbers weren't bad last year. Matt Ryan put up extremely good numbers. So let's not look like Matt Ryan was throwing like 50 interceptions. He wasn't doing that. Did he make some mistakes? Yeah, he did. But the defense also cost the Falcons at least 4 games last year. We got the special teams blunder in Dallas. There was the Detroit game where they couldn't tackle anybody. Atlanta blew leads in the 4th quarter, but it wasn't the offense. It was the defense. The only game I can remember Matt Ryan blowing was the San Diego game where he threw that impromptu interception at the end of the game. As long as he's still throwing for 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, and under 15 interceptions, he's still going to be the starting quarterback of the Falcons. But I think at some point you're going to have to look at it. But you still got another 2 or 3 years of Matt Ryan in his prime.
Gotcha. And one last question I do have for you. If you had to put a number on touchdowns and yards for Julio in Tennessee next year, what would you say that number would be?
I think you're going to look at, I think Brown and Jones will both hit over 1,000 yards. I think they both hit over 1,000 yards. I can see Julio in the 1,200 yard mark. I don't want to. It's hard to put a number because you don't know which offense is going to look like because you have a brand new offensive coordinator. Now, if I know that Arthur Smith, for example, with Julio Jones, the way he used the receivers last year, you could easily say 1,200 yards and between 8 and 10 touchdowns. But because Julio is away from the situation, I think that he'll get more targets in the red zone because A.J. Brown's emerging into Mike. I mean, he could be a top 10 receiver by the end of the year. He's emerging that fast as a top 10 receiver. I say Julio, 1,150, 9 touchdowns. Double digits, I wouldn't be surprised, but I say 9 touchdowns. So I don't think Tannehill throws over 35 touchdowns this year.
Okay. All right. Well, one guy I know that's going to be happy in Tennessee is going to be Derrick Henry because he doesn't see 8-man boxes anymore.
No. If he does see 8-man boxes, AFC cornerbacks are going to have a fit because just trying to guard A.J. Brown and Julio Jones one-on-one because if you're running 8 in the box, that means the safety's got to pick one to go over the top. Have fun with that. I mean, no matter any tight end, the person I think is going to eat the most is whoever the starting Tennessee tight end is going to be. Whoever the tight end is going to be is going to have single coverage going down the center of the field because of the fact of safeties are going to have to guard or double team Julio Jones and A.J. Brown. The Tennessee tight ends are going to have a field day. If you thought Jonnu Smith numbers were big last year, whoever the tight end this year is going to have better numbers than Jonnu Smith had last year.
Okay. Well, you've heard it here. Well, Danny, I want to thank you for coming on. I also want to thank my guest, Teron Davenport. Thank you. This has been the Julio Jones edition of Touring the AFC South. Danny, you want to give them your where they can find your work at, man, where they can find you in general?
You can find me on the 3pointconversion.com. I'm a senior NBA writer for the 3pointconversion.com as well as the WNBA as well, too. Mike and I's work is always over at the 3pointconversion.com. Also, check out my show Beyond the Buzzer, which is on Thursday nights on I-95 and Zingo Television. You can follow me on Twitter at Danny, DANNY 3 Thompson on Twitter. And like I said, Mike, I'm glad I was able to tour the AFC with you, especially now that I'll be watching more Titans games than normal this year. But you know, if it leads to a Super Bowl, for Julio Jones, I would be just super happy for him.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming on, Danny. And thank everyone for tuning in. It's been a great show. Come back next week. We got more for you. Or next time. Could be sooner. We're out.